Casey, that's great. I'm always just amazed at, and I've been doing this for a while. I'm always amazed at the amount of work that goes into doing this well. I mean, it is, and you've given a really good
True.
granular view of it, and condense that into 20 minutes is quite hard. So I'd love to bring in the panelists here, Erin and Julie. Maybe let's start off with Erin. Give an introduction, tell a bit about yourself, but particularly talk about the role of public relations in this. And then, Julie, I think maybe you could focus more on how do you get the content? How do you get influencers to actually want to take your content? Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Right.
Thank you. Thanks, Casey. Yeah, so we work very closely with folks like Casey and content writers. I do to get content for journalists and editors. And here goes my cat. So I knew that was going to happen. The joy of working from home. So I've been doing public relations for over 25 years, and the industry has really changed significantly, the media landscape. So for a while it was, you call media, they'll interview your executive, they'll write the piece. But what's happened in media these days is that a lot of publications have either gone away, editorial staffs have been cut, and there's not enough editors and writers now to produce the content. So, but yet they're still having to put out content and even more content because the news cycle is now 24/7. So they're very overwhelmed with having to produce content. So in comes public relations and people like me, Casey, Julie, who can now offer the publications byliners and original content from executives, from subject matter experts, and from senior leaders. So this has been really helpful, I think, for public relations folks and for lots of companies, because now we can get a lot of the content that we write with our messaging. And it's not salesy, it's helpful, to your earlier point, Casey. It's very thoughtful, helpful content, not self-serving, but talking about industry issues that now we can get placed in a lot of these publications. And just recently, I was working with a telehealth company. They had written a piece about what a Biden versus Trump administration will look like as far as healthcare and telehealth. And I pitched it to a couple of writers that I know, and they said, this is fantastic. One publication picked it up. They wanted to run it on the front of their site on election day because they hadn't had time to get to any thoughtful content or writing anything like that. So when you showed that the Practice Unite stuff that we had done together, I mean, that stuff definitely lives on, and you can socialize it. I think the company actually put it up on their blog as well, and they referenced that it had run in this particular site. So it has many, many different places that it can go, even after it does appear on a site. And then if it does appear in the blog, I always tell the company or the blog, listen, make reference to where it actually appeared in that publication, so that we can give them some credit too. So
yeah, that's great. Yes, absolutely. I really appreciate that. Julie, how about yourself? Tell everybody about yourself, and share your perspectives on getting content into the hands of the influencers.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think as Adam mentioned in my intro, I own a marketing consultancy that helps companies in the healthcare space reach physician and patient and caregiver audiences. And so, 100% of what I do is help those healthcare companies get their messages out, right? And so from a content perspective, one of the things that Casey said that I think, I'd love to talk a little bit more about is this idea of your influencer filters, right? And so making sure that you're figuring out who those people are. In most cases, the companies that I work with are sort of B2B. Sometimes they have a B2C or, B2 patient play, but most of the time, ultimately the physician is making the decision about the therapy or the device that is going to be used on a patient. And so, a lot of times when we use, those tools like BuzzSumo and things like that. I think that gives us a really good quantitative look at these influencers and what they might be writing about or covering, or their influence online. But I think sometimes there's the qualitative piece of it that we also have to take a look at. And I'll give you a great example. I worked with a client several years ago who was in the cardiology space, and so they had a diagnostic tool that was enabling physicians to more accurately determine if a patient has coronary artery disease. And so this client wanted this one quote influencer to talk to them, to retweet their news, to be a part of sort of the discussion. And we were able to make that happen through some PR work and, doing some introductions at medical meetings and things like that. And ultimately this cardiologist did share their content. But what we later learned was that from a healthcare perspective, this specific cardiologist, while he has literally over 1 million Twitter followers, he's sort of known as like the industry mouthpiece among his peers. And so among his peers, he actually doesn't have that much influence. And so that would have been a really important thing to know going into it, right? So there's that qualitative piece that isn't always, identified when you think, oh, somebody's got all this great following and they're very active on social, but what do their peers think about them in the healthcare space? So that's really important. Another example I can give about, how this is important is, I worked with one company who really they had a very innovative procedure. And so they knew that they were probably not going to be targeting the surgeons that had been in practice for 30 years. Most likely they were going to be targeting some of those newer physicians, who are just sort of coming into practice, building their relationships in the community. And so we needed to reach those physicians. And so what we did is we figured out who were the physicians that had really strong fellowship programs, that were over strong fellowship programs, in different healthcare or different hospital communities across the US, because ultimately we wanted to have influence over the fellows. And so, these are just a few ways that you need to look at how you're identifying those influencers beyond just the numbers, I think is really also important in healthcare.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that? Because it strikes me that the sort of the influencers, cover a really wide spectrum. So there's the more sort of traditional influencers that are journalists. And then there are bloggers and there are, other influencers. I mean, I'd love to hear from particularly Erin and Julie on, that kind of what you see as the spectrum of influencers. I mean, Casey talked about 500 having like 500 influencers, which is, that's a hell of a number to manage. But I can't really picture what that network of influencers looks like. So, Erin, you want to take it first, then Julie, then Casey?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to find when I think about reporters and I think about reaching out to certain publications, is that where my client or that particular company needs to be? Are the people that they're trying to reach actually reading that particular publication? Because I could have clients come to me and say, well, we want to be in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. Yeah, but is that where your people, is that where who you're trying to reach? Are your physicians, are your buyers, are your CIOs? Are they reading those publications, or are they reading, health IT books? Yep. So for me, it's really important when I do a deep dive into working with clients and reaching out to certain influencers, as far as reporters for me, right? Or even analysts, industry analysts like Gartner, IDC, where are the places that are going to make a difference for your business? And how can that either piece of coverage be used as a lead gen tool or something then you can take into a sales meeting? So that's really critical for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with that. When we think about, using those reporters as influencers and, placing that coverage, I think that's a great point, Erin, that, if you're working with a company that is in the neurology space and they want to reach neurologists, is the Wall Street Journal the right place? No. If they're trying to raise money, if they're trying to do a Series A, Series B, or an exit at some point, then yeah, we would love to get them in the journal. And so, I think it's, that very valid point to figure out, are those people that you want to reach, where are they, right? Whether it's what publications they're reading, or whether it's what meetings they're going to, or what podcasts they're listening to. Because I know we've talked a lot today about more written content, right? But we also need to be thinking about video. We need to be thinking about audio in terms of podcasts or audiograms. So, certainly the long form content is where we start, but can we build content capsules out of that and take a piece and make it an explainer video? Or can we take a piece and make an audiogram out of it? Or leverage an infographic for social media? So it's all about making that content work harder for you, because it takes a lot of time and research and effort to develop that initial 8,000 word piece, or the 1,500 word piece. And so making sure that content works harder.
That's absolutely. So Casey, I'd love to get your perspective on it. And then there's a great question from Alison Hall, which I want to come back to.
Yeah.
And I think I'll bring that to you, Casey.
Just a quick kind of recap at some of my thoughts. And oftentimes when I am discussing this particular strategy, I use the term micro influencer a lot more.
Yeah, there's Steve Spesney there actually put a little thing in the chat there about micro versus macro. Why don't you explain that kind of concept? But that's really interesting.
Sure. So basically this whole strategy revolves around, if you give folks what they're looking for, you can get a lot in return versus, what the uphill battle of just talking about yourself. There's so many other people out there sharing amazing stuff. So giving them a little bit of a spotlight, a little bit of a platform. These micro influencers might be other companies in your space who are trying to get some coverage and get the word out, or they might be speakers, at different conferences. That's a good place to start when you're researching these folks. So we've seen, in fact, oftentimes when we get a handful of these micro influencers, an article will tend to perform a lot better than if we just get a one-off. We've had something in BuzzFeed that everyone was really excited about that it didn't do as well as getting a handful of people that have a truly engaged small audience. We have a whole nother suite of services that is all around primary research, and those creating, bringing new data to market. That is kind of our approach for these, these macro, these high, the traditional influencers of these, New York Times, etc. That is I think a better way to get in front of them.
It's great. Just to follow up on that, Casey, the great question here from Alison Hall. Is it still true that Google looks more favorably on blogs that are written by professionals, for example, a physician, compared to a ghostwriter? And can Google tell?
I've never really come across that as being part of a search engine, part of the algorithm that there's folks that have more authority. If a physician has been writing a bunch of stuff on their blog and it and it's gotten a following, then for sure that's the authority of that site's going to beat out just a random ghost written post. But we recommend all of the stuff that we write that it does go into someone's name, just as an engagement factor. It goes a lot farther, knowing that this actually came from someone. We really want it to be true journalism that we're creating here, and not just this nameless company saying, these are the 5 quick tips written by nobody, quoting nobody, just kind of living in a vacuum. That's a tough way to go. And that's what a lot of content marketing looks like these days.
So I got a question for you guys about how salesy you can be. So just actually a recent experience working with a cybersecurity firm where we created some health tech oriented content. And I actually said, well, we want to have a little call out box where we can feature your products in there so that you can just, there's a clear call to action. And in fact, my client was the one who actually said, no, we don't want to do that. It's too salesy. So actually I was sort of like, oh, that's interesting. I was sort of, so it's rare that, that the agency is told to sort of hold back on being overly salesy. It's like, I mean, where do you guys come out on that perspective? Yeah. Erin, you're the one who's, you're pitching for the, to the journos the most. I mean, You know, how do they react if they see something which is kind of, you know, a clear sales pitch?
Yeah, most of the time when I'm pitching journalists, they'll say, don't make it salesy, don't make it thoughtful.
Mhm.
So they don't want it to be a sales pitch for the company. They want it to be helpful, thoughtful, and more industry specific. However, there are some times where there are some publications who will allow you to put links in there, and you can link back to either certain blog posts, or you can link back to your site. So I've been seeing that more and more as acceptable.
Do you guys ever use techniques that sort of like say something which is a softer sell, like invite somebody to, you know, if it's a byline, invite them to read a blog post, or, you know, if it's a blog post, invite them to watch a webinar recording or anything like that, which is something which is, I'm not selling you, I'm just giving you some additional content, which, yeah, okay, is going to be more salesy. Julie, do you have any perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You know, one of the places that I've been doing that, just as I'm sort of building my own brand and my company's brand, I've been doing that on LinkedIn, where, you know, as I'm developing my own content, you know, I'm offering, you know, if you don't want to do this, if you don't want to join me on the webinar, then you can do this. So it kind of, it's sort of helping somebody along in the journey, right? Giving them more options. And one of the things that I actually had a question about, and I'd love to hear Casey's perspective, is regarding gated content. We've been, you know, you mentioned it in your discussion, and it's been something that I've heard a lot lately that is coming up, that perhaps there might be a move away somewhat from gated content, because you're creating you know, a bit of a barrier, even though you want to get that information, you know, their email address and whatever, you know, are you creating a roadblock for people to engage with your content? And so, Casey, I'd love to hear what you would say about that. Is that something that we're going to see more of, is not requiring the email address to get the white paper?
Well, the thing that it serves is that with all of our campaigns, we're creating copious amounts of content that's out there for free. So a weekly long form blog post that starts to rack up into a major resource center with just a few months. And basically what our clients really then need oftentimes is another opt-in. So often we work with a lot of software companies, and so all they really have is free trial or something like a free trial. So by taking a handful of these articles and then re-editing them into a piece of gated content, those articles themselves, basically all that information is still out there for free. So you're getting that benefit of it, but you're also getting it, okay, it's in a nice, concise package. You do need to figure out some way to build a funnel. I wouldn't recommend that your entire site is only just, you know, opt-ins. That's definitely not going to work. If people just come to your site and you have to enter your email to see anything, that's problematic. But building little compelling ways to grab that email, especially since you've done all the hard work writing it, is I think a great thing, very useful tactic to use in the right place. But it is also very useful to take all that information, like the jot form I showed you, and put basically what is an entire white paper, 8,000 words, live on, you know, free. You don't need an opt-in for that, but you want to be very strategic in how you're doing that, because you want to get the benefit of that. That typically is if you're going after a very competitive, high volume SEO keyword or keyword phrase, there would be the best way to use that. So
I think
that's kind of my thoughts on it.
The other thing that's starting to happen is, you know, the increasing use of intent data. You know, there are ABM platforms out there like Demandbase and Sixth Sense, where you can use intent data to actually identify specifically, you know, who's coming to your site and who's looking at what. And so if you're taking a very sort of, you know, disciplined ABM approach, and you're targeting, you know, a kind of a narrow set of prospects, you might actually not need to get them to sign up, or at least not early in the process. Because I think part of the challenge is, yeah, okay, eventually you want somebody to make a commitment and say, yeah, I'm going to give up my email because I want to at least put my hand up and say, yeah, I'm interested, or I actually want to get, you know, or I want to have a conversation. the problem is if you do it too far up the funnel, you know, you're going to put everybody off. But I think that what's starting to happen is the use of intent data to kind of funnel people, you know, without really specifically knowing who they are, sort of kind of bring them closer and closer to making a decision and getting them to give up their identity at the point where they're ready to do it, rather than trying to trick them into doing it too early.
And there's always the remarketing cookie and retargeting cookie. So that's, you know, that's a way to begin to, that is a little bit like an email list where you can then, instead of how it's done normally, people just chasing everyone around the internet with just buy now, pulling them back to other useful pieces of content. The same way you would send out an email, you know, on your email list, just using those as your ads for your remarketing and retargeting can be a great way to keep everything ungated, but still grow your audience.
Yeah. The other trick that I've that you know, I've seen used and I'm trying to use myself is that you give away a piece of, you know, something like this, you know, so a webinar like this, I'm going to make this available. I'm not going to gate it. And then there's something, a sort of a giveaway afterwards, like, you know, if there's a 25, you know, if you want people actually want to download the presentation, well, then they have to actually, you know, register to do that. I've also found that sort of, you know, I when I market these webinars, I'm forcing a registration, but I'm actually forcing a registration not just because I, you know, want to get information about people, but actually because I want to be able to make sure they get, you know, they get a reminder to show up, or that they put the appointment in their Outlook. So you know, there's a lot of, you know, it's not an easy decision.
I think that news outlets have done a really good job with this, especially during this pandemic, where they sort of let down the wall and allowed you to get into that gated content. And then for me, at least, I realized, wow, I really like reading the Times or the Washington Post. I'll pay that $1 or whatever it is, because that content's meaningful to me and I really enjoy it. So to your point, you know, pulling them in, letting folks realize, wow, this is really awesome content that is worthwhile to me. And so I don't mind giving up my name or, you know, email address or whatever to get it, to continue to get it.
Yeah, I've got a question here from Jessica Tripedi, saying, what are the regulations that need to be considered here? I mean, you know, GDPR in Europe is an issue. There's sort of like a GDPR-like regulation in California, which, you know, is, you know, what do you guys use? I mean, Casey, you want to take that because you're the one creating the most digital content here.
Yeah, GDPR is a very big thing. So, you know, the email addresses, we're looking for, you know, publicly published email addresses. We're not getting sneaky. You know, these are folks that have kind of put something out there that they, you know, want to receive these updates. And largely we've dabbled in a lot of different email type things. And since we're basically doing favors and getting links for these influencers and spreading the word, they're you know, almost always really excited to hear from us, whether they decide to link or share it or not. And then there is a fine line when we're quoting and sourcing these folks that we don't plagiarize. So if you take a whole paragraph of people's stuff, you know, or really are just giving their bread and, you know, their main thing summarized in your post, you can, there's a balancing act there, but there are some clear guidelines. I forget, my head of writing is the one who's in charge of this, but there are very clear guidelines of what is, you know, to follow when you're sourcing different folks out there.
Great. Well, folks, thank you very much. Maybe just sort of wrap up, any kind of closing thoughts, like one piece of advice you want to give everybody out there, just like one simple little soundbite that they should take away. Who's going to go first?
I'll go. I think the biggest thing to just think about is the balance of quantity and quality. You need a high quality, but you also need to be consistent, and you can't just sit for 6 months working on one blog post and think it's really worth your time. So that balance is critical.
And that was actually, I was sort of had something along those lines, which is, you know, when you're developing content, either for the company that you work for or for yourself, don't let perfect be the enemy of done, right? So like, churn it out, get it done. You know, I myself was on sort of a 30-day content sprint on LinkedIn. And that's tough to post every single day, you know, whether you're doing it for yourself or you're doing it for a client or the company that you work for, just get something out there, you know? So that would be my advice.
I started this year with the intention I was going to start this business, and with what I call a 20 for 20. Like every day I posted something on LinkedIn, and by day 10 I was like, God, I wish I'd made it 10 for 10. But it was 2020, so I kind of had to stick with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say one last thing, make it interesting. We are all so time starved that I mean, we just, you want something that's going to be interesting and that you're going to walk away with saying, well, that was worth my time to read.
That's
so
great.
Make it good.
Well, Julie, Erin, and Casey, I want to thank you so much for your time today, your insights, and for sharing best practice. I think this has been incredibly informative. I'm going to make the recording available in the next couple of days, and you know, and then I'm going to churn this into so many blogs and using it.
Good.
So thank you very much, everybody, and thank you everybody for attending and for your questions. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.
Everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Adam.
Bye-bye.
Bye.